about what it's like to communicate truth. We're talking about proclaiming the truth, proclaiming Christian. How do you do that in the 21st century setting? Lots of things change and technology changes. And I think even about the way that the world has changed around us, sometimes we're not very good at adapting. There are things that are absolutes. We do not move, right? We're grounded in Scripture. But sometimes in advancing the cause of Christ, we need to adapt our methods. And so these gentlemen are up here representing different media ministries, and I know it sometimes sounds a little bit bigger than we actually are. But it is what it is. It's media of different kinds proclaiming the message of Jesus Christ through their individual ministries. And so we want to take some time to not highlight the ministries necessarily themselves, but just to help you think with us about how that works and talk about those things so that it gets your mind going if you're not involved in it. If you are, to maybe learn and even to sit down and talk with some of these guys during this week and say, how do you guys do this? We've had this problem. Sometimes technological stuff seems scary and we don't do what we need to do because we're just afraid. COVID pushed us, didn't it? COVID made some of us that didn't want to live stream go to live streaming and figure it out. And so we don't need to wait for a second COVID, do we? No, we need to kind of push forward. So I've got these brothers here. I'm up here representing IFCA's media ministry and advancing the cause of our podcast. And so I'm going to pose the questions to these brothers. But when we get to the time when you can come up here and ask some questions of the panel, you can address them to me as well as the representative for advancing the cause. And so I'm going to ask these guys to introduce themselves and the ministries that they represent as far as the media. So they're going to have different names from their churches, but they are part of the local church and they're part of IFCA. So I'm going to start here to my left with Ken and let them go down the line and introduce you to them and their media.
I'm Ken Shipchase, pastor of Pillar Fellowship in Jeffersonville, Indiana, and one of the co-hosts of the Do Theology podcast.
I'm Caleb Hilbert, pastor of Lewis and Clark Bible Church. I am co-host of For the Love of the Church, a podcast with Dave Dietz, and then also a podcast called The Forgotten Pew with Bob Rogers.
I'm Jeremy Howard. I pastor Orchard Hills Bible Church in Payson, Utah, and I'm the other part of the Do Theology podcast.
Gary Gillen, our ministry is Think on These Things Ministries. We have 3 different podcasts, I think, right now with A Wonderful Day in the Lord, The Shepherd's Bookshelf, and then a more general one that we're doing.
I'm Jesse Randolph. I'm the pastor teacher of Indian Hills Community Church in Lincoln, Nebraska, and our media ministry is called Sound Words. I'm the co-host with Aaron Nicholson, who couldn't be with us this week.
I'm Steve Wong. I'm just a fanboy of all of their podcasts. But I also pastor Fellowship Bible Church near San Francisco, California. We have 2 podcasts at our church. One's a theology podcast called Team Theology, and another one is a counseling support type of podcast called Heart, Soul, Mind.
Now, we include the last 2 guys, Jesse and Steve, to show you that you don't have to have a beard to have a media ministry. So, you know, it is beneficial, though. It is beneficial, but it's not necessary. All right, brother. So here's some questions for you, just to think through with us and to share with us how you approach things. But the media has always played a part in spreading our Christian message, whether it was through parchments and messenger in the Old and the New Testament, or whether it was something a little bit further down in history. Like for decades, churches and Christian organizations have used radio, they've used television, and now with the proliferation of lots of different media platforms on the internet, I want you to share with us, who is your primary audience? Because you weren't just saying we want to reach everyone. You were thinking about who you were aiming for. So who is your primary audience, and how do you see internet media actually reaching them? Anybody, you don't have to go in order, you just, whoever wants to answer.
Last summer, I read a biography on Percy Crawford, It's a name that not a lot of people remember or know. He was someone who was kind of a pioneer in radio and television ministry, Christian ministry in the 30s, 40s, 50s. And that was a totally different world. It's fascinating to go back and consider all that it took to get a radio ministry going. And if you had a radio ministry going, that was the thing. I mean, you were reaching a lot of people. And because of that, it was very few people who were involved in that. But the few who did, who had the money to be able to do it, got to reach a lot of people. And the difference today, of course, is that anybody with a cell phone plan and a cell phone can start a podcast. So it's a totally saturated environment. There are way too many podcasts that exist out there, almost like Bible translations. We just have too many, right? And you get confused, lost, and don't know where to go or what to do or if it's even worth it. For an effective podcast, and what Ken and I try to do with the Do Theology podcast, is you have to, find your specific niche and target a specific audience, as you were asking about. And so for ours, we're looking for people who are theologically interested from a perspective of a biblical hermeneutic. So people who are curious about theology and want to grow in theology and want to deepen their understanding, particularly theological triage is how we started out. But they want to do so from a perspective of a literal, grammatical, historical hermeneutic. And it turns out, we don't have a lot of people banging down the door to get in for that kind of thing, but there are a lot of people out there who are interested in that, and that's why we exist.
So as I was thinking about podcasts, there's a lot of podcasts on leadership, a lot of podcasts on theology, and I didn't want to just be part of that noise. And so when I was talking to Dave and talking to Bob, we realized that the subject of followership is not addressed. And so we really wanted to deal with that, deal with how to follow Christ. And the podcast, not for leaders or theologians, but for those who are disillusioned with the church. So the one that I do with Dave, that's really focused on that. The church has gone wrong. And then with the one with Bob, that's for, we call it the Forgotten Pew, because there's a lot of people who need supplemental stuff because they're not getting it from the church, specifically in the Northwest. So it's kind of like a supplemental thing for people that are in the pews, but not deep theologians.
Yeah, I would add that in our context with Sound Words, we really started as a benefit to our church. Our first and foremost priority was getting more content. Caleb's word supplement was the very word we used. We have pulpit ministry, of course, we have midweek small groups, we have all kinds of Bible-based discussion and teaching happening. But looking at what the members of our body would otherwise put in front of their faces, you mentioned Mr. Beast earlier, right? Not to say that everybody in our church are huge Mr. Beast fans, but the reality is there's this sea of data and information that is going across every cell phone that everybody owns now, that why not give the members of our body something beneficial, something that's instructive, something that's biblically rooted, and it's going to build them up in sound doctrine. And in our case, it was doing that every 30 minutes per week, once a week episode. But our root commitment was to do it with the local church. And then we always thought if it fans out to others beyond our four walls of our church, great. But that's never the priority. It's not to build followership. It's not to hear the sound of our own voices. It's to build up the body in sound doctrine and compete with the marketplace of ideas that they're already swimming in.
I know Church of the Open Door in Leavenworth, they address theirs to the sheep, and that's an excellent thing. And Steve, what about you?
Yeah, we address ours particularly to our church. I had taught a theology class at our church for over 30 years, and it just kind of got old coming out of COVID. We didn't know how we would do that. My young pastor says, well, why don't you do a podcast? We can aim for a younger generation. People are looking to have information while they're commuting and digesting. And it's always sometimes hard to take the class, and this way they can get some of that information. So I did that particularly for our younger people. But then the young people really responded well, but so did our older generation, our senior citizens, who get on me in this week of our podcast. It's also meant for my co-hosts, because it's a way for me to mentor theologically the new pastor at our church. as we go through these topics. And then also the counseling side, I do with my daughter, and I can help give her material to strengthen her counseling ministry as well.
Right. And what about you, Gary? You guys were doing this, Think on These Things, which is now podcast, but it really started textually based, right?
And we've been doing textual book reviews and various articles since 1974. Not 74, 1994. That's been a long time ago. So now we're moving more into podcasting. Largely, I kind of go back to a couple of things we said. A lot of young people are, a lot of people in general, leaving the church. They're deconstructing, they're leaving the church, and a lot of it, they never had any input. We have a good campus ministry going right now, and we're finding a lot of these young people have gone to church, but they went to church and they learned nothing in their whole life. And they're kind of open. They seem more open than in the past. And so to get information out to them that is helpful and gives them biblical content is really, really important. But another thing we're seeing is, so our podcasts are different, depends on our audience. But our newest podcast is the Shepherd's Bookshelf, which is, I'm going to be doing book reviews and encouraging people to read books and so forth, because this generation right now, the younger generation who do not read books is an amazing thing, and the studies are showing that our brains are changing. People are not able to concentrate, they're not able to think, and that's true in the Christian world, it's true even of ministers. So what can we do to encourage people to actually think, to delve into good stuff? If they don't do that, they're going to listen to all these bad podcasts, but that's what they're listening to. And like I said, there's tons of them out there. And there's some really bad ones. I have people come to me on Sunday morning, even this week, and say, "What do you know about Doug Wilson?" Well, hell, let me give you 30 minutes of that. And they're picking up with these guys who are very savvy with media, and if we don't compete with that to some degree, we just lose them.
Yeah, that's helpful, because I think for those of you that aren't involved, I honestly didn't listen to podcasts a whole lot. And that was when we started Advancing the Cause. I hadn't really gotten into listening to them. But we recognized that there was a draw from people out there that aren't. So if you're here and you're like, I don't really listen to podcasts, that doesn't mean you shouldn't be producing them. You really do need to know what's going on now. Doug Wilson, Canon Press, has a massive media, and he's using cool things like, flamethrowers in videos in November and burning stuff down and all kinds of things. And it's just drawing in young men like crazy, because they're saying, that's cool, I want to be like that, I want to be in your face. And you would think, well, yeah, that's that group of people. No, that's your people. That's your people that are listening to this stuff. And so you need to be aware that Moscow is drawing in people, and their theology is damaging. It's not just different. There's something to be said about different. There's also something to be said about damaging. And you need to be aware of it. We talked about it last night, of defending, but you also need to be countering it. It's not enough to shout against these things. We need to be producing something that is quality, that is good material in its place, so that we can point them to that. Now, guys, each of you has regular ministry responsibilities. Every one of you are busy. And it really doesn't matter, because sometimes when you're a small church pastor, you're like, I'm doing everything. I'm answering the phones, I'm sending out the bills, I'm doing, and you're like, the big church pastor, like Jesse over here, or like Gary over here, these big name guys, like they've got all these staff members that take care of everything. But I guarantee you, sit down with a big church pastor and ask them, how much free time do you have? And I guarantee you they'll say, I don't have time to have that meeting. Send me an email or text message, because I got to go somewhere else and do something else. So small church, big church, it doesn't matter. We're all busy. So these guys are niching time. They're finding a place for it. So you have regular responsibilities. You're pastors. You're doing the work of the ministry. So, and some of you are church planting pastors. So why do you make this a priority for your already busy schedule? Why are you even bothering with this when you could be spending more time and doing something else for church? Or at least introducing yourself to your wife and kids again, because you're so busy. Why is this so important? Is this a vanity thing?
Is this because you like to hear your own voice and you and your mom listen to the podcast? Well, but I don't think that's it, right? You've got a reason. So what's the reason that you're dedicating so much time and not only energy, but money in some cases? Because it's not free.
Yeah, I think for us, it's some of the things that we already discussed a little bit just with the last couple of questions on the amount of content, a lot of media that's out there that people are watching. It's everybody is watching some kind of content. Everybody is engaging with some kind of content. Everybody who has an internet connection is engaging with something. And if we can produce content that is from our theological perspective, from using our hermeneutic, we know it's going to be biblical, we know it's going to be feeding people, and it's going to be grounding them in sound theology. That is very important for us as we consider that so many people are listening to something. It's part of our shepherding responsibility to provide with them this good content that is grounded in sound biblical theology.
Yeah, for me, a lot of people have come and talked to me. So I have family members who have left the church. And so there wasn't a lot of things that I could send them. I could send them a book, but they don't read. So what do I do then? How do I help even people in my own family? And then also too, I get to work with two great guys, and I feel like I get a platform them, right? I get to give them a voice. And so basically I just get to do all the editing and their thoughts come out as well. So I feel like I'm serving them by allowing their voice to be heard and helping, people within my own family and community.
I would say on our side of Indian Hills and Sound Words, there's both a short-term, maybe immediate focus and a long-range focus. The short-term immediate focus is we're in a college town, Lincoln, Nebraska, home of the university. Go Big Red. Check in with next year. We'll be 12-0. We're going to win the championship. Check in with me next year. Sorry, Iowa fans. That's the short range. I just failed a couple guys in the room. Sorry. That's the short term. We have college students in our town, tens of thousands of them. Again, who are scrolling. And I think of the other churches in our town, the seeker-sensitive, kind of weak sauce, watered-down gospel type of churches are in our town, and they're putting content out. So that's landing on the phones and the home screens of all these kids who are going through Instagram and YouTube and all kinds of social media platforms, TikTok now these days. They're going to see all the other churches advertising, marketing, promoting, and putting out high-quality digital media, but very low-grade gospel or theological content. So why not step into that stream and give them real content, meaty content? So that's the immediate aspect. The other side of it is we are in the middle of this wave, digital wave, whether we want to acknowledge it or get into it or not, it's there. And I always think about this, and I don't think this is an overstatement. If back in the 15th century, you were a publisher of a sound doctrinal book, and you were introduced to Johann Gutenberg, who just introduced the printing press. He said, I got this idea where I can distribute your good content across the world. Would you say, nah, I'm good. I'll keep scrolling it out on a notepad here, and I'll give it to my grandmother. And then you would say, this is an amazing opportunity to get good doctrine, sound doctrine out to the masses. I do think the modern digital era is the equivalent of Gutenberg 500 years ago.
And it doesn't matter if the books that were put out were bad books. That's not an excuse not to produce good books, right? And the same thing goes for digital media. Yes, there's a lot of stuff out there, but we also need to counter it. Yeah.
My motivation for Team Cup Theology is just being passionate about our church family being grounded in sound doctrine. And so I just wanted to outline that for them. We do a series such as Soteriology or Theology Proper, and we'll do 8 to 10 podcasts of those. The other podcasts that we have, our Heart, Soul, Mind, it's addressing mental health issues. And when I was first thinking about the term mental health, I didn't want to use that term. I'm thinking, what my IFCA friends say. but I have one guy at church says, Pastor Steve, if we don't use that term, we're marginalizing those that are struggling with that. And I said, all right, well, as long as I can give biblical sanctification content, then that's going to be our goal. So people who are hurting and struggling emotionally, we know it's more really a spiritual problem, but if I can give biblical content, and I put my notes for every lesson on our church website so that they can read that. And you can make sure we're biblical in our content. So it's for you to keep me that sharp too. But it's to really address those that are hurting and people who may not feel comfortable going to a group, but we're providing some counsel in that way.
That's great. That's great. You know, you brought up something that maybe we don't often think about is mental health issues is one of those topics that comes up in regular media all the time. Taking care of yourself, self-care, all that kind of stuff. So if we label everything with strictly, marginalized language that we use within our camp, then it will never get outside of that. And so if you use that wording or we tag things that way, then it will draw in people that are looking for that kind of help and have found nothing out there. And they come across a video like yours and they find actual biblical help because we've labeled them in a way that draws them in to see what we have to offer. That's excellent. Now, you guys have mentioned different parts of your ministry. So why don't we start over with Steve and we'll work our way back this way. What platforms are you using? When we talk about platforms, we're talking about blog posts. So blog posts in general, we don't need to know the actual platform, but then there's the video type of stuff. So some of them are just audio, like Advancing the Cause is only audio right now, but we are moving to video format as well as audio. So why don't we start on that side and kind of share with us where you're at right now as far as how does your content show itself out there in the world? And if you have any plans of things that are going to be coming up as far as expanding on that, your reach, share with us as well how that's working.
Our podcast is on Spotify for the audio and is on YouTube for the video. We don't really have plans to get big and splashy because we're just focusing on our church. But all of our content, even the written notes of our podcast, are on our church website for our church family to be able to access it.
Yeah, we started very small and basic. We were purely audio at first as well. And we recorded in this thing called the Nest, which sits over our auditorium. It was just Aaron Nicholson and I talking over a table and one microphone, and it was great. In consulting with our elders, it was really amazing how they wanted to back our vision for a bigger splash, a bigger platform, bigger impact for good content with well-presented visual content. Because we have the doctrine, we all share the same doctrine, but it's one thing that can kind of hamstring us is if the visual side of things is a distraction. And that keeps people from clicking on your content, watching your content, staying with your content. If it's kind of janky and thrown together, they're going to go on to something else. They might go on to something else that is theologically incorrect. So we've invested actually in a studio. We actually have a digital recording studio where we do not just the audio podcast now, but the video podcast. So we're on really any platform now, from Spotify to YouTube to Apple Podcasts and all the rest. It's funny, Jeremy mentioned the radio guy from before. We're actually on the radio. So in Nebraska, all the population is centered around Lincoln and Omaha. But out west, there's a bunch of farmers who, they still listen to the radio. They get those tractors and they listen to the radio. So we're statewide in Nebraska on bot radio as well, which is, it's still kind of a throwback, still kind of old school, but we've actually heard testimonies of people getting into good churches locally and even stories of salvation through old school radio. So we do radio, audio, video.
Yeah, we do all video pretty much, and we use all the regular ones, YouTube and Spotify and all that. I would mention this, right now we got dinged on Sunday from YouTube because one of our Sunday school teachers used a video that off YouTube that is should have been copyrighted by some production Hollywood thing. They caught us right in the middle, shut us down. We're shut down for 2 weeks. So if you're trying to find any of our new stuff, you can't get there. That's something to consider. We're not being persecuted. We broke the law. But at the same time, if you got everything on one platform, it might be something to consider. But yeah, I think if you're going to do the video, you're going to have to put some money into it. I know Jesse has a nice production thing there. We've got quite a bit of stuff. It's got to be done pretty well in the video, or people aren't going to appreciate it. So you got to be willing to put some money into it. Not everybody can do that. But I do think it's money well spent. All of us spend money on lots of things in ministry. To spend money on this is to budget that out. I think is well worth thinking about as far as the future goes, because we're dealing with a different world in so many ways than we did before. So I think we need to really think about that. By the way, going back to the deconstruction and the de-churching and all that, I'm going to throw a plug in for the 5 people that are left over for the theological roundtable Thursday night. For those that are riding motorcycles or playing golf, we're going to talk about that in a discussion format and how we can reach out through these kind of medias as well to reach those kind of generations. So that's a shameless plug.
Well, Gary mentioned also you for a long time had print, and so you're continuing to do print as well, which we don't, in this context, don't always think of as media, but you're still doing that. Which
So
is
we do print, and what I'm finding too, honestly, I'm finding staff members, pastors, who say, I can't concentrate like I used to when I'm reading my commentaries. Their brains are changing. That's a shame. So somebody the other day said, well, I wrote some stuff on what every Christian should know, 10 different things theologically. And somebody came to me at a conference and said, this is the most wonderful stuff. I've sent it to my kids, but it's too long. It's 5,000 words. It's too long to read, so they'll read about half of it.
Yeah.
So that kind of set it back. And that's 5,000 words, not very long, but it is for them.
Yeah, if you don't know this TLDNR, this abbreviation that people will write, it means too long, did not read. And so they can't even write out too long, did not read. So if they can't handle that, just know that the generation that you're ministering to, they're not going to read your blog post of 6,000 words. This is not going to happen. So this is a good way. I think Doug Wilson actually reads his daily blog audio because it sounds like he's reading. And because he knows that as well. He's just reading, and it sounds like he's reading it. It sounds like a robot, Doug Wilson, but that's okay. Yeah, he always still listens.
And what they just said, what Gary and Jesse just said is absolutely true about the quality of the video, though. If you are going to go down the road of doing video, it needs to be high quality, not just because it's visually appealing to those watching, but YouTube, if I can personify the website, YouTube can recognize what's high quality video and what's not, and can promote things that are higher quality and demote things that are not. And we've experienced that some because we are both audio and video. We don't do text right now, any kind of writing. But on the Do Theology podcast, we're audio everywhere, and then YouTube. And what's really interesting is our audio downloads are extremely consistent, very predictable. YouTube is all over the place. YouTube, you can have a real stinker of an episode followed by like one of your best ever. And you're trying just as hard on both of them, it just kind of depends. But there are some people out there who only consume our content through YouTube. They'll watch every episode. Our YouTube will always be at a minimum threshold, and that's because there are certain people that only listen or watch our episodes through YouTube, which is fascinating to me. Because if I don't have to go to YouTube, I won't. But some people, that's how they do everything. And so it's a really interesting dynamic right now with all the different audio and video options. It can be a little overwhelming, but that's where the people are. And so we've seen results from that. And now we're monetized on YouTube, making about $1 a day. So when we're gearing up, so I can switch careers here, be a full-time video guy.
Yeah, we're taken back by his boasting here.
I would take $1 a day. No, so we primarily go through sermon audio, but we branch out to Spotify and the Apple and Google Play. I don't think we have any plans of going video, although I'm sure if you give us money, Dave and I will come to your living room and do a live episode just for you. We're willing to do that. That'll be fun. No, but we're just strictly focused on the audio. We're busy guys. We do things a little bit different. We don't have a weekly cast. We do 8 episodes. We spend a lot of time just kind of in the background doing those 8 episodes. We release those episodes, and then we start working then on the next season. So we're not focused on weekly crunch. So that helps with time for us.
Great.
Well, if I could, you mentioned future things to branch into. One of the spaces that we have not yet stepped into that has been a point of conversation for us is getting into the realm of the shorts and the TikToks and the reels. And there's so many people that are engaging with content through
The
that.
brains are
scroll.
shrinking and shrinking and shrinking, brains.
Yeah, our brains are shrinking.
So you meet them where they're at, right?
Yeah, well, that's exactly right. People are engaging with things there, and so they're flipping through and they're scrolling through these things. And there are so many people that will not even watch the long form videos anymore. They will just scroll through those short videos on the TikToks, the Reels, and the Shorts, either on Facebook, Instagram, the TikTok or YouTube, and that's where people are looking, especially the younger the demographic, the more they are engaging with video content in that short format rather than the long form.
Which is a challenge, because basically the thought is, if you can't say it in 30 seconds or less, I don't want to listen to it. Well, name a theological topic we can talk about in 30 seconds or less, right? And so that's a challenge.
Yeah, Tony Wood out at Mission Bible Church in California, if you're on social media, you'll see that they're producing a lot of those kinds of things. And there are clips taken out of his full sermons. And so you can actually go and it'll direct you to that. So that is a way of connecting to that. Hopefully you would grab the attention from a clip and then be drawn into the full sermon. So those are useful. They're not to be disregarded at all, but that also is evidence of the fact that people have less patience to deal with these kinds of things. How has your content been received? I mean, some of you, like the Duke Theology podcast, put out things that are confrontational with those that don't agree with us theologically. And so not just covenant theology, but even Christian nationalism or with Mormonism, things like that. So how in general, and anybody can answer this, how have your media broadcasts in whatever form been received? And what have you done as you deal with fair criticism? And what have you learned in that process?
We haven't gotten any death threats yet. So
That's always a plus.
that's positive.
Or maybe you're not saying it strong enough.
Okay. So, yeah, I get a fair amount of pushback because I'll do some series of critiquing things, and you get people who show up that don't listen to a word you say. They're just there to make the noise and back out. And I have a Twitter account, so I'm used to seeing that kind of stuff anyway. And, it doesn't super bother me. But then you do get people who do listen and still disagree with you and have something actually constructive to say. And so what I try to do is look for those kind of comments, and if those pile up, I want to do an episode where I respond to those people. I'll highlight some of the other people too, just for fun. Won't give them an actual response, but people who have a constructive response I want to respond to. And I think that's the way that we make progress in the Christian world, is by not running away from that, saying, oh no, not everybody loves me, but saying, okay, here's a brother or sister with a genuine concern that threw out a couple Bible verses on this that seemed to go in their favor. Let's talk about that. And that's the respectable thing to do. Just posting something and what's it called, post and ghost, where you just post it and then you're done. That doesn't exactly work. And actually, when you think about reaching more people, YouTube and those other types of platforms really like it when you engage people, if you respond to them in the comments and stuff. And so looking for those people is helpful and it makes us better. So it's a good thing for us to do. Anybody else post controversial stuff?
We follow you on that, Jeremy. You call yourself a gadfly, I think, at one point. That's a good description. You step into those battles and wear it, and I appreciate that. We haven't really faced a whole lot of controversy in terms of those who follow, subscribe, and comment. It kind of follows the topic. We did a KJV only episode not too long ago, and that ruffled some feathers. But most of the time, it probably goes in line with our philosophy. We're kind of in and out on certain topics. So we have kind of a 25 to 30 minute episode where we attempt the impossible, the extent of the atonement, 20 minutes, that sort of thing. And so we get some comments back, but they're usually more positive and affirming. I will say though, on the in-house side of the church, getting back to the philosophy, why we do what we do and why we dedicate certain staff hours to something like this. I wouldn't call it opposition, just more questions that we receive. Like, is this the best use of resources for our church to reach people this way versus, doing more door knocking locally or, evangelizing on campus, that sort of thing. And we're presenting it like we're not looking at those as mutually exclusive. We can do all of it. So we, of course, will do the local ministry, we'll minister to the saints, equip the saints. But with the excess that we still have to invest in other ways, this is the way of media. It's no longer, booklets and pamphlets, it's online media.
I think there's a danger, a trap we can fall into though. If you want to get a quick attention, a lot of people do something shocking and outrageous. That's why Doug Wilson's so popular. Joe Rogan had a big thing too, and that's why he does that. So we have to be careful. We're not looking for that. I don't think we should put things out that are just outrageous and ridiculous and blood torches and whatever else to get attention. It would bring attention, but that's not what we're after. So we're not looking for controversial things on purpose. We're looking to defend things that are important to us. And so if you go back to the foundations of media later on, you'll see the things that are important to that particular group of ministries. We're looking at hermeneutics. We're looking at we're biblicists. That's a term that I assume that you'll bring out later on this week. That's a term of derision in many circles. We're supposed to be knuckle-dragging idiots that can't get beyond the Bible. We don't know the theology, we don't know the history, and we're just dummies. And that's how we're being portrayed by a lot of people. And so we want to give something, put something out that is intelligent, that is biblical, that is solid, that is showing what Scripture actually teaches with a proper hermeneutic, biblical hermeneutic. And that's controversial, and some people are going to push back on that, but that's the kind of thing I think we have to really look at.
So there are some guys here that are already producing their own media, and there are some that maybe this has piqued their interest and they're going to start looking into it. So I know I have learned a lot through this journey, and I'm sure you guys have all learned a lot. Stuff that works, stuff that doesn't work, mistakes, all kinds of things. And I'm sure there's a lot of technical stuff behind that. But if you were to share with somebody that they were thinking about developing a media ministry, what would be some advice, or what would be a lesson or two that you've learned as you've been making this journey that would be helpful for the men here to think about and maybe learn from either your mistakes or even successes and surprising things that God is doing as you were working through this?
I think the most important thing is to know why you're doing what you're doing. And that applies to anything that you do in ministry across the board, but particularly with this, if you're just making content for the sake of, we just gotta make content because that's what you do these days. It's not really gonna go anywhere, it's not gonna help people, it's not gonna be the benefit that you hope it's going to be. If you know why you're doing what you're doing, if you have that nailed down, that's going to fuel your passion, it's going to fuel the longevity. There's so many people that said, oh, okay, I need to get into podcasting, and they release 3 episodes and they're done. They find out, oh, this is actually a lot of work. This is actually not as easy as I thought it was going to be. And so you get a lot of people that jump into it not knowing what they're getting into, and they don't have a clear why driving them. And so as soon as it turns out to be a little bit of work, all right, I just give up and I back out. So I think that's really the most important thing, is knowing why you want to do this before you jump into it.
Yeah, when I first started podcasting, I was part of another podcast. We kind of had a crisis because we were asking several people to come onto our podcast as guests, and we would have conversations of, well, if we get this person on, that'll give us a boost, right? So we got this guy, we got that guy. And so what ended up happening was I just felt really bad. I felt really convicted. I was using these brothers for advancing myself. And it's really easy to get into that trap because there is something really exciting about having somebody other than your mom listen to you. Right?
I wouldn't know.
Yeah, I mean, that's just exciting. You're just like, wow, 2 people listened to me this past week, and somebody said something to me other than hi. We're doing awesome. And so when you get then these bigger name guys on, and then you get like a huge boost, you just go, well, let's chase that again. Let's chase that again. And so, yeah, knowing why you're doing it, I think is important. And then just saying, we're just going to be us. I don't have to be, I don't have to be do theology. I don't have to be any of these other things. I'm just going to be me. And I think that's valuable in and among itself. Right.
Any others, guys? While you're thinking, I'll share something that I've learned is we first of all decided we were going to do a schedule, and that was figuring in how much time do I have to spare for this. And knowing that you all got busy schedules, that's a wise thing to do, is to say, we're going to do this, the Advancing the Cause does it twice a month. So we're gonna do it the first Monday and then the third Monday of the month. And then you just schedule that out for the year, and then you figure out, here are my topics, and you just start planning the topics. And you fill in the year, that's 24 in a year. And then you figure out who can speak to that, and you find them, and then you start making the connections. If you schedule that part out, it's a big relief. It's almost like a preaching schedule, and most of us preach through the Bible, so we don't have to think about that. But like me, I was trained as an expositor through books, and when somebody asks me to do a topic, that freaks me out. I've got 66 books to choose from, all kinds of things. I don't know where to go. Please just tell me what to preach on. And that can happen when you're producing media. It's like, I don't know what we're going to do. And then you're panicking. You're trying to figure out a topic. If you could sit and think about that when you've got a little bit of a block of time, plan it all out, and then work from there. I've got 2 more podcasts coming up for this month. I've got so-and-so scheduled, and then you can do it. Or if you do it solo, if you just record by yourself, then you can start preparing for that ahead of time, gathering information. Scheduling helps the busy pastor. So if you're a busy pastor and you want to get into this and you think, I don't have the time, you have the time. You can just use the little bits of time that are here and there. You just need to use it to your advantage by scheduling things out, and that helps. Because you don't just record, you don't just invite speakers or prepare, you also have to plan on editing and then uploading and all the information that needs to go with that for podcasts. Videos are a little more complicated. So scheduling to do all of that is very, very helpful for that ministry. So I would encourage you from the beginning, start with a clear concept. Who are you reaching? How often you're going to produce, and don't go for the stars. We're going to do it weekly, or don't be an Elmo where we're going to produce one every day. I'm ordering the Wall Street Journal. You need to think about how your schedule will work that out, and then schedule and plan for that. So I'd encourage that for you guys. Any other tips or thoughts, guys? No? See, they're so burned now. They have no idea. They're praying for you that you don't go into it. No, this is good. I think it will help. Some of you will find that it will actually help your ministry in a small way, where people will hear it, and then they will, just like a radio ministry, they will come to your church. They will come and want to hear more. And so I'd encourage you for that. You may not intend on it growing outside of your church. You're just ministering to your little flock, and that's a wonderful thing. That's not a negative thing. It's not a bad thing. So don't worry if you only reach 25 people. That's okay. That's 25 that you didn't have another way of reaching. And so it's a supplemental, like some of these guys have said.
Add something to that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. If you are able and you have the bandwidth, you're able to step into something like that and produce that kind of content, that's terrific. And to what you said, 25 people download it. Yeah, don't get discouraged if there's not a lot of people engaging with it. If you're consistent with it, the Lord can honor that, just like any local church ministry can be honored with small people. But I would also say that I don't want to put the burden of feeling like everyone has to create a podcast. Everyone has to create a blog. Everybody has to create these videos. I don't think everybody has to do everything, just like not everybody has to write a theology book. You can recommend a good theology book to your people that you didn't yourself write, or you didn't yourself create. Well, there are other resources that you can recommend. Hey, here's a recommended podcast that you can listen to from people that we trust and have confidence in. And I think that's a valid way to encourage people to be taking in good content if you yourself do not have the bandwidth or the technical know-how to produce those sorts of things.
That's great. That really does segue into this last part that I want to address is, let's talk about Foundations Media. Foundations Media's got a display back there. It is made up of 7 different separate ministries. Jesse Randolph and his church of Sound Words. Gary Gillian, Think on These Things, and the related podcasts that go with that. Ryan Day, Corey Marsh, Corey will be coming in later. He wasn't able to make it for this, and Ryan had a ministry commitment he couldn't get to the convention here. but they have pastor scholar Peter Gaiman from Shepherd Seminary, Bible Sojourner, Ken and Jeremy do theology, Michael Vlock, who I don't think he has a catchy name yet, just Michael Vlock, but Mike Vlock is producing great content. He's part of Foundations Media and then advancing the cause of IFC. So how did this come about? And I think it's probably Ken and Jeremy who broached this whole thing last year at convention. So you guys can probably answer that because maybe there's a story behind the story. I was just given an invite. How did it come about? And then what is Foundations Media?
So, when Ken and I first started the podcast, the Theology podcast, a little over 4 years ago, we had in mind from the beginning that we wanted to be more than just one podcast, or close to the beginning anyway. We had visions of a network of like-minded podcasts that would be stronger together, reach more people with sound biblical theology and instruction and application. And I think we thought it would be called the Do Theology Network. That didn't happen. But we pursued that idea because it kind of got put on the back burner. But we started pursuing that idea again because a listener actually reached out, a listener to our podcast, and said, hey, this would be a good idea. You ever thought about getting with other podcasts? And we thought, yeah, but we haven't acted on it. And so we decided to give it the old college try. And last year at convention there near Cincinnati, we met together, some of us did, and kind of thought through what this could be. Ken and I even put together a PowerPoint about, where we thought things could go. And the reality is there are some big conservative Christian giants out there in media that we want to not become, but we want to compete with in the sense that we want to provide an alternative so that there would be better theology with a voice. And we recognize that we're stronger together. And so we started getting together and talking about this, and we've now launched, and it's become Foundations Media with those that you mentioned, and there will be more added soon. Right now we're just trying to get the plane off the ground a little bit more and leveled off. But the idea is that we would share our audiences initially. Hopefully all of us grow a bit and kind of share more people. And then from there, seeing what the Lord would do when it comes to filling out the website with more writing, maybe even church curricula that we could put together, things of that nature, having a combination of scholars and men who have been pastors for a long time and church planters and everything else. It really gives us a well-rounded group, and they're all churchmen, which is very important. They're men who care about the pew. And so we have that as our goal, is to build up God's people with instruction, with podcasts, with media that is biblical and contextual and consistent. Those are our 3 words. Biblical, everything we do, it runs through the Bible. Everything is interpreted in context. We will be contextual. Every passage that we look at, we're going to look at the context. And we're going to be consistent in that too. We're not going to abandon those focuses that we have. We're going to keep the focus on God's word and interpreting it rightly. So men who are committed to that and love the church, what could be better than that, right?
So there's a table back there that has some information there if you want to go back and see. And there's actually a studio that is set up because there's going to be some recording going on during the week. And so maybe one of these guys will grab you and sit down with you and have a good conversation. And I don't know if it's video and audio, but they're back there to do that. We want to take some time now to entertain any questions that you might have. And so if you have a question, we'd ask you to come up. If there's more than one of you, maybe you can sit on the front pew. But if you could ask the question in the microphone for the recording so that everybody that's watching online on the live stream could hear it as well as for the video. So we can come up and ask the question, and whoever feels led to answer that question, we'd love to have that. Or you can address it to one specific individual if you feel led to do that.
Graves, Northern California Regional. I'm sorry, I thought we were still in motif. My question would be one of equipment. You mentioned that it's important to have quality equipment. I don't expect you to give brand names or model numbers, but what are some of the features, some of the qualifying features you look for in a video equipment, microphone, things like that?
Thank you.
The best you can afford. That's kind of a trite answer, I suppose, but there's all kinds of options out there when it comes to equipment, And, if you're looking at a video camera, something that can record something in high definition, that's a must. Something that can capture sharp images in low lighting, because sometimes the lighting aspect is very challenging. That's a must. For ours, we use the Sony ZV-1. It's a really relatively inexpensive camera, all things considered, but it does the job. It's designed for vlogs. Yeah, $4,500, yeah, relatively inexpensive. Well, compared to, $2,000 cameras and such. But it's designed for vlogging, for capturing high quality video at a short distance. And so it makes it a good option in a smaller studio kind of environment. If you've got a little bit of a larger space, you may need something different. But then as far as microphones go, there's a whole host of different things that are out there. Just do a little research, and there's lots of different recommendations out there. Know what your budget is and get the best thing that you can afford within your budget.
And it is worth what you can afford. I mean, it really does make such a huge difference. And I don't know, for a lot of us smaller church guys who are used to dealing with tight budgets, you look at some of those numbers and think, okay, I don't know if I can do that. If you're not going to be able to get some of the best that you can afford, just don't even start, probably, would be my suggestion. Go all in, make it happen.
And one thing I would add to that as well is, if you're going to get into that space, start with focusing on the high quality audio. If you can get clean, crisp audio, that's the best place to start, because a lot of people that will listen to that, they'll put up with a little, I would say if you can't do the video, don't do the video, but if you've got a high quality video and your audio sounds like garbage, people aren't going to watch your video no matter how sharp, no matter how clean it looks, if the audio sounds terrible. So start with the high quality audio and then look to integrate the high quality video after that.
For those of you who were intimidated by what he just said, I use a cell phone, I use a USB microphone that connects to the computer in GarageBand, and a ring light. And so some of those simple equipment can get you started.
Yeah, you can start very, very cheap. We did that. We actually borrowed the recording device that the women use for the women's conference. They weren't using it most of the year, so you can connect some mics to it. So we connected it, and I sat at the conference table in my office and recorded it. Now, when you go back and listen to it, it probably sounds exactly like that, like I was sitting in my office recording, but that's okay. We get started. So, you start with what you've got, and then you expand. As a matter of fact, Jeremy received a microphone as a gift from one of his listeners because, first of all, they loved it. They loved the fact that they listened to him, but also they just wanted him to sound better.
True. Hey, I would have gone a different route, but like replacing me. But
He's actually been showing for a new computer. Did you ever get a new computer?
I didn't get a new computer. I got a new camera though.
Okay.
Because I got two people reach out about the microphone, and I said, well, I already got one guy on a microphone, but hey, can I get you in on a camera? I'll work on that.
So Lord may provide. You may get started, and then somebody may step up and say, well, you need something better, and get it for you.
But I would say, and I think Gary would agree with me, the best way is to find an Edwin Tevez, and he will take care of everything. If there's a tech guy in the church,
Yes.
that is so key. And the stuff that Edwin does for Southern View Chapel is so good.
Leave Edwin alone. But,
Like Edwin, not Edwin.
but you're exactly right. The young guys, a lot of them know stuff I have no concept of. So get people in your church that know these things, cameras, technology, whatever. They can be exciting, a great ministry for them, and they know what to do there. And if you don't know that kind of stuff, just get these guys, these younger ones, know a lot of stuff, but leave Edwin out.
And you can just Google this stuff. We started Events in the Cause. I did it, and I used software on my iPad that I just got from the store, Apple Store, and I just didn't know what to do, didn't know how to do it, and then we eventually figured it out, and then eventually found somebody who could do it better than me. But just start where you're at, and then move forward. Anything else, guys? Any other questions? Do we have any other questions from you? Come on up.
Jim Braden from the Michigan Regional. Our ministry would actually be considered a followership. We focus on veterans. veterans they basically are responsible for about a quarter of all the suicides. Part of it is PTSD, part of it is other, but basically it's hopelessness. Veterans tend to hide. They don't come to churches. How can a podcast assist us in, number one, evangelism? Because the first step in counseling is evangelism. Number two, finding those that are out there that might hear or see a podcast but never want to come to a church.
My first thought is YouTube over an audio podcast. I think the podcast world is a little more complicated, and YouTube is very accessible these days. Anybody with a Roku TV or whatever can get to YouTube. There's an 85-year-old man in our church who used to work for the railroad, who every morning gets up and has this YouTube channel he subscribes to that's a GoPro camera on the front of a train, and he goes through Europe or wherever it's going that day, and he does it every day. And I think many vets, especially older vets, would be comfortable with YouTube, especially seeing faces, seeing people talk. I think that would be absolutely key over and against an audio-only podcast. That's the first thought that I had.
Yeah, so Jim, you can get your camera and you're on your phone, and you can record some kind of devotional, but you're aiming at these vets to give them hope. You're giving them the gospel, you're doing those kinds of things. And that's the wonderful thing about this media, is you can target exactly who it is that you're trying to reach with your message. And so you can be mindful of that, is there are people out there looking for this content. So you're going to have to make sure that you get it in such a way that it's findable out there, and they're looking for it, that they can find it on YouTube. But when you start producing it, and it is low requirements to get in on this, the YouTube channel is free, and you have a phone, and you probably would be able to talk to somebody like your son and say, show me how to do this, and they can help you get started. But it's not complicated. You just need to know what are those steps I need to take. But that would be a way to begin reaching out to just those guys. And sometimes it's the introduction. It's, hi, I'm Jim Braden, and you tell your story. And there's logarithms. The YouTube builds into their systems, these computers, go through all the text of what you say. It's all transcribed, and it picks up on all these key words, so that when somebody goes searching, it doesn't even have to be in their title necessarily. That's helpful, but it knows that's what you're talking about, and it will pull them in as they're looking for something. And so those are helpful things. That's why YouTube is especially helpful.
One of the things we started during COVID was a short 5-minute podcast. And we have it on every day. It's called Wonderful Day of the Lord. And we're reaching out to our own congregation. Again, this is a good way to start, by the way. We're reaching out to our own congregation. And the goal was to give them some input to the scriptures first thing in the morning, 6 o'clock in the morning. It's hard to get Edwin up at 6, but we did it once. And then so every day we've got quite a following of people that get up. They listen to it when they want to, but they have every day 5 minutes, not a half an hour, not a long, difficult thing, but we're in the Word, even starting the Scripture. Went through Job recently and had tremendous interest in that, going through Job. So people we're talking about a veteran, going through the book of Job systematically over 3 or 4 months could really help somebody like that. And it doesn't have to be very complicated.
All right, we have another question? Right.
So I'm Ryan King, Rocky Mountain Regional, and I'll grab this because I'm tall. So trust this is in no way accusatory, because I know Jeremy some, but I don't know the rest of you. I know guys that really seek to advance self through social media, the shorts in particular, that kind of thing. How do you guys balance advancing good theology and the scope of your podcast without that self-aggrandizement, trying to be the next big conference speaker or whatever that looks like? How do you guys work through that in your own hearts?
That's a fantastic question, and it's a real peril for sure in our day. That's the downside, that's the dark side of this kind of media ministry. A couple of thoughts. One is real practical. in different seasons, I've had to turn off notifications on my phone. Just a very simple, I don't want to see how many likes and things, views come in. That's one thing. The other is, it kind of ties into the question that was just asked, which kind of putting those two questions together. The whole point of our ministries, I think, is about getting the gospel of Jesus Christ to the lost and building up believers in sound doctrine. The more that we think of our podcast as like these free-floating ministries that have nothing to do with the church that we serve or the ultimate mission that we're on, I totally see that peril, because then you're just then you are just like a Christian Joe Rogan or whatever the case may be, or you might think of yourself that way. But if you think of yourself as a blood-bought sinner saved by grace, and in our cases, pastors of local churches who are charged with shepherding our flocks, who are just as prone to pride as anybody else. If we have those guardrails up and realize who we are, what we've been saved from, and put in practical steps to make sure that we are checking ourselves, those are some of the mitigating factors I would recommend. Not always perfectly, because there are some of those times where you see that comment in that thread on that video, and you want to go after it. You want to debate, you want to spar with that person. Number one, that might be pride on your own part. Number two, that might actually take you off mission from what you're actually called to do, which is to evangelize the lost in your community and to share truth with people in your flock. So those are some general thoughts. I'll leave these guys to add some more, but I've thought about that one. There are temptations to shut the whole thing down when we're like, man, are we thinking too much about name recognition and getting the Sound Words brand out there? But as long as we keep that conversation going and have accountability over those topics, we'll keep on charging.
Yeah, for you.
I know for me, one of the things was to view other like-minded podcasters as part of a team. That was really important. We're different. We're not radio, so we're not going on a specific time and asking people to come and listen to us at a specific time. You can download my podcast, download every one of these guys' podcasts. Awesome, do that. You don't, it's not a zero-sum game. You can listen to all of us. So seeing myself as being part of a team, and one of the things, because I struggled with that quite a bit, our podcast had to really reevaluate. So one of the things that we ended up doing was saying, we're not going to seek advertisement. We're going to give people space in our podcast for free to talk about their ministry. And so I've kind of carried that over to some of the other podcasts I've done, just coming to ministries and going, you get a minute to talk about yourself. We're not going to charge you. We're going to try to get everybody funneled to you. And so just taking on that servant role of saying, I'm here to serve you. That's a really important demeanor, and seeing myself as part of the team, I think is really, really helpful for me. And we did it with the brothers as well.
There, to me, a couple things on the surface that are helpful to remember, like someone who's thinking that he's going to get famous or whatever through this, or thinks that he is famous. Just reminding myself how few people out there know the name John MacArthur. To us, that's like, ooh, up there, But for the general population, like, ooh, what? And he's like this big-time famous guy to us. We're nobodies. We are absolutely nobodies, and we'll always be nobodies, and that's good, right? And then there's also like a personality thing too, where some people's personalities are more prone to get fixated on that kind of stuff. So you kind of got to know your personality. But beyond all of that, kind of going back to what Ken said earlier about knowing why we do it. I do what I do, especially the more confrontational stuff that I put out there, for the honor of the Word of God. That's why I'm doing it. And that's what motivates me to keep doing it. I know when I start a series critiquing Christian nationalism, for example, it's going to, probably get more clicks, and it's going to bring in people who don't like me very much. And I consider all that, and I think this is for the Word of God. This is an important issue. It's affecting God's people. It's relevant. God's Word speaks to it. I care about the Word of God being honored among the people of God, and therefore I'm going to walk into that. And if you lose that perspective and it becomes about clicks or showmanship, then yeah, you need to shut it all down for sure.
Are there any other questions?
this around, if that's all right.
I don't know, this is kind of awkward. There's so the title of the panel is Proclaiming Truth in the 21st Century. And with a special emphasis, obviously the panel is podcasters, so special emphasis on that. But thinking of a podcast as a one-directional form of media, as in there's not a conversation that's happening. So I'm thinking in proclaiming truth in the 21st century, I think there are digital spaces, particularly with social media, where there is a two-way conversation that's possible. I'm thinking of specifically that there's a book by Nona Jones, Creating Social Media to Social Ministry, something like that. So that's kind of the question that I have is, how have, in your context, have you delved into those digital spaces, creating a community where you can have a two-way dialogue, and how you leverage that for the spread of the gospel? Yeah, I think a lot of that conversation for us is really happening on YouTube, where people can leave comments and engage with the content directly on the page where it is. We do have a Facebook page for our podcast. We found that a lot of times we would post the episode on our Facebook page, and Facebook does not, their algorithm doesn't like it when you post links that take you off of their platform. So you can post a link to the podcast, you can post a link to YouTube, and it just does not get hardly any engagement at all. But if you have an image or just a post or stuff like that, that's where some more content is engaged with that way. So you kind of have to learn a little bit about some of those algorithm type stuff, but a lot of the direct engagement comes through YouTube comments.
And our show is not an evangelistic show. We aren't, our primary audience isn't the lost. We obviously hope that the gospel is understood by anybody, any lost person who'd be listening. But our primary audience is Christians. And so the difficulty with Christians who are in a denominational setting or just have theological convictions is that we tend to find our silos, and we like to stick with our silos. And especially on the internet, we know that if you're not in our camp, then you're stupid, and so you type you're stupid on the comment and then you leave. And that's just kind of how it all works. However, there is a format for some of our shows that I've done before where I do long-form conversations. And so, for instance, I had Matt Slick on the show from Carm.org, the founder of Carm. And we had a back and forth that went on for about 30 minutes or so about the preacher of rapture. And I think that was very instructive for people listening, because he's a millennial and hadn't thought of John 14, 1 through 3 in light of the coming of Christ and how that could play into the thought of a preacher of rapture. And so, it wasn't that contentious. We're friends and we had that conversation. So stuff like that, I think, can be really helpful, because people are used to Joe Rogan Experience type shows where people come on and they talk for a long time and they disagree, and it's beneficial to those listening. And so that's something I like doing and hope to do more of.
To add to that, I would also remind us that this is not the church. This is not our congregation. So we know that there's limitations. We don't want to produce an artificial community in that sense. And that is one of the downfalls of the social media revolution, is that people begin to believe that their followers and their friends and all of those things are actually a community, and they're isolated, and yet they're supposedly social, but they're not. And so we don't want to continue that illusion for them. We want them to interact as people that are consuming these things. But the reality is they need to be fed, and they need to be ministered to and loved and served, and all the things that come out of the church. And if they don't know Christ, that's where they need to get pointed to. It is not a substitute for the church. And so we want to make sure that all of this media ministry is a handmaid to the Church of Jesus Christ. It is not a replacement for it. So we'll go ahead and close on that. I'm going to ask Gary, would you close us in prayer as well as pray for the blessing of our meal?
Father, we thank you for this group of men, ones that are up here and ones that are out in the audience, and each of our desires to reach people for Christ, and proclaim the word and uphold your honor and glory. We thank you for that, Lord. Thank you for this little time we've had together to just encourage one another in these things. We hope that in some ways this has been helpful. Thank you now for the rest of our conference, and also, Lord, for the food that we're going to partake of in just a moment. In Christ's name.
Thank you, brothers. You are dismissed.